everybody. Today we're here with Brandy of Brandy Burrow Astrology, and we're going to be talking about crime charts, missing people charts, death charts. Oh, I look way too happy talking about this. Why don't you introduce yourself and what got you interested in these and all that kind of stuff?
I'm Brandy Burrow of Brandy Burrow Astrology, and what got me into this, one, my morbid curiosity. So when we're smiling and laughing, it's not that we enjoy that horrible things happen to people, but I do love the investigation and all that. So what got me into this was I saw an article written by Kirsty McIntosh, who is a criminal astrologer, and it was about missing people, how she uses astrology to find out what happened and even how to locate them. But basically you can use the astrology charts to look at crimes and try to find more to the story. You know, the stars in the sky show everything that's happening. So that's how I got into this, and like what led into this long, I don't even know how to describe it, like this years long study of doing this now and studying crimes, famous crimes, studying missing persons locally.
Very cool. Why don't you share kind of what the most important things when you're looking at, because with these sorts of charts, there are things that are more important than others to really take into consideration, to really focus on. What do you focus on?
So the way I read these charts, because I also do natal astrology too on the, as well, but these charts I read different. I take these very literal. So the first thing I'm looking at is the ascendant, which is going to describe the victim in a crime or missing persons case. It's going to tell us what kind of situation they were in. Like, is it dangerous? And this is really helpful for someone maybe who's missing and we don't know the outcome. We can look at the ruler of the ascendant to see, or were they in really bad danger? Is there, maybe not, is something else going on? That's where I start. So we look at the ascendant ruler, we look at the moon, it also rules a victim. And then looking at the 7th house cusp will show us the suspect or anyone involved, if there was someone involved. Sometimes that's a question too.
Yes. So there are lots of things to consider. And like you said, it is a more literal thing. Because that's kind of what I do with them too, is try to focus on more literal interpretations.
Yeah.
Though it is hard for me to leave the psychological stuff out.
Exactly, because natal reading is like more psychological and you're feeling into a sign, and I don't know, but with the criminal, it's like literal. What, for instance, on a suspect, if they're being represented by Jupiter, you're getting physical appearance and details like that about the suspect. So yeah, it's very literal.
Yeah. Do you bring in do you always bring in like things like fixed stars or anything like that when you do this?
Sometimes. Usually I bring in the fixed stars when I just need further validation. Like, okay, I'm looking at this chart, it looks like, and that's especially in a case where we don't know the outcome yet. I can see the chart kind of portraying this story. Let's see if there's any fixed stars that line up, that validate or are consistent with what we're seeing. But, not all the time. I usually go to that. I start with just like the inner planets, expand to outer planets, and then maybe bring in something like that.
That makes sense. Yeah. When I do this kind of stuff too, I will play with the fixed stars, but they're not like the first things I look at. It's usually down the line to kind of get a better idea of maybe what I might literally be looking at, that kind of thing. Should we pull the charts for John Lennon stuff, and you can
let's do it. Yeah, I thought this was a great example just because most of us know who John Lennon is. We know the story, we know the outcome, so we can see how the chart displays this kind of information.
Yes. Let me pull it. Okay, there we go. Okay. So we have his date of death was December 8th, 1980 at 10:50 p.m. in New York City. And time of actual time is important here, right? Like knowing
yes, you want the exact time as possible. And something like this is when he was shot. at 10:50. So this is going to give us the most accurate chart of the situation. If someone is missing, if we're doing a missing persons case, we want the last time they were seen or heard from, or last time they sent a text, if it's really them texting. So yeah, time is very important.
Let me ask you, this is kind of slightly off topic a little bit. Do you read Chiron in these?
No, not usually. I on my software, I forgot to take it out of the preferences on this. I do let it pop up for natal readings, but not really. I'm not against Chiron in a criminal chart. It's just not usually my go-to.
No, I was just because it's not really mine either, unless it's like right up the ascendant's ass or the chart ruler's ass or so, or it's
Right.
like right there. I was just wondering if it was something that you incorporated, and if you did, I was like, well, I want to know what you're doing.
No, not you, like you. Like if there's something kind of peculiar about it, I'll be like, oh, this is interesting. But yeah, it's not my go-to usually.
Okay, why don't we talk about okay, so he is the ascendant, the Virgo ascendant, and Mercury in
And
the
he's also the moon.
and the moon. Yes, moon is always co-ruler in these charts.
Exactly. Anyone who studies horary astrology, this is the method we're taking here, basically. So, and the first thing you're going to notice about his planets, he's got Mercury and the moon ruling John Lennon, showing him in this chart. They are both in detriments. They are both in the opposite of their home sign. So right off the bat, we know he's in a horrible situation. Horrible.
Yeah. Yeah. And then we'd go to the 7th house right here.
Yeah, so this is going to be your suspect, the killer, perpetrator, Mark David Chapman in this case, and he is ruled by the 7th house cusp in Pisces. So we're looking at the traditional ruler of Jupiter. And then in this case, I always take the modern ruler as well, Neptune. So I'm going to look at both of these.
Okay. And I know we talked about this briefly, but the mental the mental state here.
Yes. Yeah. So we got Pisces here, which definitely in crime charts, no matter if you're looking at the 7th house person or if you're looking somewhere else in the chart, Pisces can indicate mental illness. It can indicate drug use or addiction in some circumstances. So yes, the fact that it's in Pisces, it's interesting that definitely some markers here that there's mental illness.
Yeah. Yeah. And with Neptune in the 4th in Sagittarius, would you read that as like him being near the home of John? It could, isn't the 4th also like the home of can it also be the home of the person?
It is very literal. Exactly. He's standing at the home, and the story is he was there hours before the shooting. John Lennon lived in the Dakota building in New York City, which is like a co-op of kind of like apartments, but they're owned.
Yeah.
And so he was down on that first level for hours before. He even met John Lennon hours before, got an autograph from him. So he's literally at the home. Another interesting thing about this is he's also ruled by Jupiter.
Mm-hmm.
This usually, when this is on the 7th house, we're looking at someone who is either from another country or from somewhere far away. He flew in from Hawaii, which is not on mainland. So this was definitely a Jupiter.
Far distance.
Yeah, exactly. So we're right now, we know details that this guy is not from New York City, not anywhere nearby. He's probably got some extra weight on him because Jupiter can represent someone who's a little chunkier.
Yeah.
Not to body shame him, but and so yeah, these are some good details we already have about him. And then we have the mental illness factor as well.
What would you say about the 10th house?
So 10th house in these crime charts, they can represent how the public reacts. It's about the police,
mm-hmm.
how the police are handling investigations. So, again, I take these literal. And so this is something interesting about this. When John Lennon was shot, police arrived within, I think, 2 to 3 minutes. John Lennon was, the injuries were so significant that they could not wait for an ambulance. So the police had to literally throw him in a police vehicle and take him to the hospital. So we got Gemini, which would rule local travel, to me, cars when we're looking at criminal charts.
Yeah.
You know, so the cops like physically put him in a car to help him. So I found that pretty interesting. It's also another thing about this case, Yoko had asked police and media to not release the information that John Lennon had died. She wanted to get home first to be with their son before it was on TV. The son was at home. John Lennon was, I think, 5 at the time. He's at home watching TV, and she didn't want him to find out about his dad on TV. And unfortunately, I think it was ABC. There was an ABC news broadcaster in the ER at the time that John Lennon was brought in, overheard what was going on, gets on the phone with the station and reports it. And so it did leak out on the news on TV really quickly, you know, against Yoko Ono's wishes. So, you know, and Gemini it's about media too sometimes. So,
and it's fast.
It's fast.
Very
Exactly.
fast.
So another example of how these charts are extremely literal.
Yeah, they really are. Let me ask, because I know that you do work with the nodes in these cases. How do you read the North Node that's in the 11th, right? Yeah.
That's in the 11th. It's getting ready to get into the 12th. It's right on that cusp. So in these cases, I like to look at them to get more information about maybe motive.
Okay.
Sometimes some karmic stuff if we want to go that direction with these cases here. And we were talking about this, Ellie. It's like, did Mark David Chapman do this for fame? He says he didn't. Well, with a North Node in Leo, I think he did.
Yeah, and like we were talking about earlier with Jupiter in the second house being like values, things that are value, it does feel like he thought of, or he felt like John Lennon was a valuable target. That's how, or something along those lines. I may not be phrasing that exactly correct, but something along those lines.
Yes, and he was a huge Beatles fan, and part of the story goes that as he became mentally ill and wasn't doing so well, he looked at John Lennon like a hypocrite and didn't think he was living the life that, you know, John Lennon portrayed and preached about. So there could be something about values there with this.
Oh yeah, because last night when I read about this obviously before I knew about this, but I did do a little bit more reading into it. He was bitching about how the song Imagine and what it kind of talks about and how that definitely could play in too.
The interesting thing in these crime charts, Saturn represents the body, the actual physical body. And you see Jupiter right there with Saturn, and Mark David Chapman shoots John Lennon and then stays around for the police to arrest him, to take him into custody.
I read about that. That's like, to me, honestly, that in and of itself signals somebody who's not all, you know what I mean? Not playing with full deck.
Exactly. And so this chart's showing he's actually staying right there with the body, you know, right there where it happened. And yeah, it's another example of how it plays out literally on these charts.
Yeah. Is there anything else that when you look at these, that you always take into consideration? What about this? What about this? What about this? What about the 8th?
Yeah, so look at the 8th house there. This is a good way in most charts. And if it doesn't give you the information that matches, you might want to reconsider the time, because in these charts, that 8th house, the sign on it will give you a manner of death. And so this 8th house is in Aries, which is a very violent energy when we're looking at criminal stuff. It's guns, it's stabbings, it can be head wounds, you know. This is in an Aries sign ruled by a very strong Mars, because Mars is in Capricorn. It's exalted. So we know this is a very violent death, and he was shot 4 times and pronounced dead 17 minutes later.
Yeah, which means,
which he was practically, I mean, he was dead on arrival, but doctors still worked on him and were trying. So yeah, this was a very violent death.
What about in charts? Let's pretend like just for a second that this wasn't a death chart, but like a missing person chart.
Mhm.
If you want to, like, would you also like the death patterns or,
Yeah,
or danger patterns or what have you?
Yeah, if someone's missing and you're like, okay, are they still alive? What happened to them? Well, if you see the strong planets like the Ascendant ruler or the moon in the 12th or the 8th house, not a great testimony to someone who is still alive, especially if they're there with Mars or Saturn. 8th and 12th house patterns and the 4th, like this, we know what happened. John Lennon's ruler and the moon are both in the 4th house of endings. 4th house can also be seen as a death house too.
Yeah, it really is. Yeah. Yeah, I've noticed that with those charts too. The 4th can be very activated either by being active, having a lot of shit in it, or like some ruler in some house ruler there, like the 8th ruler or the 12th ruler there. Yeah.
Yeah, 4th house is all sorts of things. It's endings, it's the home. And another interesting thing about this chart, Mercury just enters the 4th house. It's only like within, less than 2 degrees.
Yeah.
In this 4th house, John Lennon gets out of his car and is walking into the Dakota building when he is shot. So you see Mercury literally leaving the 3rd house of local travel and going into the 4th house. So it shows him getting out of a car and like walking into this. So,
and it all just happening very fast.
Exactly. And you got Venus right there in the 3rd house, which would be relationships. Yoko was right there. It's in a detriment as well.
Yeah.
This is a really interesting chart to study just because you have these planets that are in detriment. You can see them leaving houses, going into the next, and it just really tells a story.
Since you brought up the karmic thing, if you want to go that way, you mentioned that earlier, and I would like to go that way for just a second. just entertain me for just a second, because I do notice that Venus is squaring the nodes.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think that means anything?
I think everything is everything. And especially when you have south and north nodes, south node is very karmic, past life, if you believe in that kind of stuff.
Yeah,
I do. So it's definitely the fact that it's squaring. And it's interesting because it's squaring Venus, a planet in this chart that might have more to do with Yoko.
Yeah. That's kind of the way it feels too. And even like it being like opposite, and I know not really bringing Chiron into this, but I kind of can't because it's also squaring the fucking nodes. It's hard not to, just in this kind of context. Yeah, I do wonder if that does have anything to do with her.
It might, and I mean, I'm just now thinking of this. With Chiron in that 9th house of philosophy, like how you believe. There is interviews with John and Yoko in the early 70s. I want to say around 74. I should know this. I'm such a Beatles freak. But they're talking about how people in prison for murder and all these things, that they don't believe in the death penalty. They believe they should be treated with love, because obviously murderers lack love. And interesting, this happens and beliefs are changed. And, she always advocates for Mark David Chapman to stay in prison. And I don't think she's a hypocrite. I'm not saying that. I think, when we have life experiences, it does challenge our beliefs and philosophies. And you do see Chiron here in that 9th house squaring the nodes. That could be an indication of something about belief systems.
I'm sorry. Hold on.
You're good.
Okay. Sorry about that. Yeah, I think, yes, I do think that it could have to do with belief systems. Yeah, for sure. It definitely could. I also read that she said something about it being, I did read that she said that December 8th should be called Forgiveness Day. Yeah. But that she wasn't sure if she herself could forgive him, which seems very, that feels very square, Venus squaring the nodes, opposite Chiron, all this.
Yeah, and that ruler of Chiron being a Venus in detriment, definitely conflicting.
Yeah. Yeah.
That is interesting.
Yeah. Is there anything else that I didn't ask about these kinds of charts that
Let's see. I something else about this chart, just like I said, is one of the more fascinating crime charts I've seen. When you're looking at astrology, you're looking at Mars and Saturn as usually malefics. These are two planets that cause a lot of challenges, a lot of problems. And in this chart, you got both those malefic planets that are both exalted, because Mars is exalted in Capricorn, Saturn's exalted in Libra. So we have very, very strong malefic planets. And then, our beneficial planet like Venus and a detriment, definitely. And it makes me want to study more of what's going on during this time, just historically, and like what other events were happening. Because this is such a, I don't even have a word for it, just kind of a weird time where these planets are so strong like that in negative ways.
I'm not sure how close it was to this, but I know wasn't Reagan's assassination attempt right around here too?
It was the following March, I believe.
Okay.
I believe it was 1981, probably March.
So maybe not right in the same exact time, but yeah. Okay.
But Saturn would have still been exalted.
Yeah, probably. Yeah.
Mars might have been, what is that, about 4 months later? Yeah. Shouldn't have been in Aries yet, but yeah, so definitely you had Saturn in it exalted, which would bring a lot of challenges.
Yeah.
Depending on how you look at it. Saturn, it's not always a bad guy. I shouldn't put that rap on it, but in a crime chart,
yeah,
Saturn exalted is
yeah, you want to look at it again a little bit. Yeah, I mean, like in my practice, I generally try to read Saturn more. Well, I try to see the positives and the challenges, right? Because it does have challenges. But in these kinds of charts, it does tend to be more of a challenging.
Yeah, it's more of the literal bad guy, unfortunately. Yeah. Sorry, Saturn. But yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I totally understand what you mean. One more question, because it's on this chart. Do you look at the part of fortune?
I do. And this is in the 12th house, maybe another marker for mental illness, but part of fortune is definitely something that befalls someone. And the ruler of this, is the sun in the 4th house again. So,
and man, Neptune's ass.
Yes, right there with John and his planets and endings and the home.
So you see that, so you read, because that's actually something that I don't really look at in these. Part of fortune, you see it as what again?
Oh, just that's like things that befall you, things you have no control over. Okay. Maybe with it being so strong in the 12th house, it brings in, like, it kind of challenges your philosophies. Like, is everything meant to be? Is everything timed out? This is definitely something that can challenge that. But I do look at it, especially if it's in a peculiar house like the 12th or 8th, or maybe in some cases, if it's conjunct any planets, definitely see what it's doing in the sky.
I'll have to start doing that, because that makes a lot of sense. I just haven't done it before. So yeah, that makes sense. Cool.
I say, the sky uses what it has, so I look at whatever's drawing my attention. In this case, it would definitely draw my attention.
Okay. Yeah. And that definitely makes sense in this. Yeah, for sure. In this context.
Yeah. And I guess the only other thing we could probably say about this chart is that John and Yoko stopped at home to say goodnight to their son. They were actually going out to eat. They had been recording earlier in the day, in the evening, and they were like, let's go home, say goodnight to Sean, tuck him in, and then we'll go out to eat. The 5th house rules children. And this 5th house is in Capricorn, ruled by that very strong Saturn, that exalted Saturn, which shows another part of the story, that the child was taking priority. And that's maybe, it is what drew them at that place at that time.
Yeah.
So just another way you can put more pieces of the puzzle together.
Yeah. Yeah. And with Saturn and Libra, aside from the exalted thing, the relationship aspect, like yeah.
Yeah. And Mars in Capricorn as well, sitting there right on that 5th house cusp, another strong.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's just all came together, and it's horribly sad, but it's just an example of how astrology can show you events, and it shows you what's going on. It shows you details about each person, and And this is how you can use it. So like I said, we know the outcome to the story. We know what happened. But if you have a case where we don't know what happened to someone, this can give us a lot of information.
Let me ask you, do you, when you're working, because I think I'd probably know the answer to this. Do you like to look at the person's chart too, or just strictly this?
It's helpful. Yeah. And I'm going from memory. I didn't like review it in the last day or so, but if you look at John Lennon's natal chart, there's a lot of this that lines up with it as well. If you look at his progressions, I believe his moon was hitting the 4th house in his progressed chart when this happened. So yeah, absolutely. It's really good to have the natal charts as well to compare.
But you could still totally do this even if you don't have access, like, because some people don't have access to their time of birth, or somebody that's missing, they may not have access to their time of birth or what have you.
Yeah, you just want to be careful with like the moon or any planets that maybe just switch signs.
Yeah.
Because the moon moves so fast during the day. That might be a harder one to nail down. But you can get lots of information from an untimed chart as well for a natal chart to compare.
Cool. Yeah. Well, I guess we'll go ahead and head off. But if you want to share where you can be found.
I would love to. BrandyBurrowAstrology.com. I'm also on Facebook. I do natal readings. I do criminal and missing persons by request. So if you have some case that you have a personal connection with and need to know more, please reach out. We can definitely work together on it.
Very cool. And I will put the links below in the description box where you can find her. And I definitely recommend that you check her out. And I will see all of y'all later on.
Thanks, Ellie.
Thanks for being here.